Greetings and welcome to another impressions video here at Words About Games, and today we're going to be looking at Judgement. Judgement is an action-adventure game and spin-off from the popular Yakuza series, starring a brand new cast of characters in a new storytelling genre, but with the same setting and similar gameplay style as past Yakuza games. In Judgement, players take on the role of Takayuki Yagami, an ex-lawyer who quit after an alleged serial killer he got acquitted murdered his girlfriend. Now, 3 years later, Yagami is a private detective investigating a serial murder case. Judgement feels a lot more inviting to newer fans of the studio's output, and I say this as someone who played and greatly enjoyed Yakuza 6 last year. Yakuza 6 was the first game in the series I played, and while I dug the gameplay mechanics and quirky tone of the game, I did feel a bit lost with the narrative and characters, given my experience with the previous 6 games boiled down to a YouTube recap just before I sat down to play. I'm not blaming Yakuza for this. Again, I had a great time with Yakuza 6, but the fresh start that Judgement offers is a lot easier to get into for someone like myself, who's a relative newcomer to the series. It probably helps a lot that the story Judgement is telling is fairly gripping, built around a genuinely intriguing mystery, some really well thought out twists and turns, and a solid cast of core characters. While the game does get off to a particularly slow start from a narrative standpoint, I enjoyed slowly unravelling the mysteries of its opening chapters, bolstered by the interactions between the easily likeable characters, particularly Yagami, who's a really solid protagonist. He's clearly haunted by his past without being too edgy or brooding, striking an excellent balance between both. I also appreciated the tonal shift of Judgment's story from the series it spun off from. This is a more serious affair, while still containing goofy side activities and retaining a charming sense of humour. It's a story about a serial killer who murders their victims and gouges their eyes out, after all, taking its cues from legal thrillers as opposed to gangster movies. There's still time for jokes, of course, particularly from my favourite character Kaito, who offers the perfect wisecracking foil to Yagami. But I really appreciated the more serious tone of Judgment's narrative, which helped ground me in the story being told, and made me appreciate the comedy all the more. Gameplay-wise, a lot of Judgement will feel very familiar to anyone who's played a Yakuza game before. As well as being a talented lawyer and private detective, Yagami is also a martial arts expert. Combat is fairly similar in nature to the brawling of previous games, though there are some differences. Yagami has 2 fighting stances he can choose from, one of which focuses on single targets and deals more damage, and another that features more sweeping attacks for dealing with groups. There's also a mortal wounds system, which lets powerful enemies lower Yagami's maximum HP with lethal attacks, which needs to be treated by special rare items or by visiting a doctor. Yagami feels a lot more nimble than Kiryu did, though there are some fairly basic moves locked behind the game's progression system, such as dodge rolling, which need to be unlocked to make the combat feel less clunky and a bit smoother. Luckily, SP can be acquired from literally everything you do, whether you're completing missions, laying a smackdown on roving gangs of thugs, or even finding cats during investigations, or eating new food. Whatever you choose to do with your time and Judgement, you'll be rewarded. Though it does feel somewhat moot to heavily upgrade your combat abilities when the best tactic remains picking up a large object and swinging it around until everyone has stopped moving. Items also feature heavily in the game's EX actions, context-sensitive attacks Yagami can perform when prompted that look spectacular and deal massive damage to enemies. It's always worth buying new ones to give yourself more options in combat. The other side of the gameplay ties into Yagami's roots as a detective and lawyer, and these mechanics are a lot less successfully implemented than the fighting. The worst example is tailing targets, which involves slowly following suspects through the streets, ducking out of sight whenever they turn around. These sections are tediously slow and always last far too long. Judgement also incorporates investigations into its repertoire. First-person treasure hunts that see you scouring environments for clues. Whatever you're looking for is generally maddeningly ambiguous, until you unlock a skill that causes the reticule to vibrate when you pass over something of note, which makes things more bearable. Dialogue options exist for when Yagami is questioning witnesses or suspects, with bonus SP tied to asking the most efficient questions, but there's no real penalty for messing these segments up, which quickly robs them of any of their weight. There are some fairly decent gameplay additions. Lockpicking is actually quite well implemented, and the newly added drone doesn't totally suck, though that's mostly because drone racing is actually a fairly decent side activity. All in all though, you'll generally be glad when investigation sections are done and you can get back to the combat or narrative. Judgement inhabits the same city as Yakuza, Kamurocho. It'll feel very familiar to anyone who's visited during a previous outing. It's as densely packed with activities as ever, with various arcades, side missions and activities, and friendship missions, which see you completing tasks for NPC to raise your relationship with them and, in turn, reputation in the city. You won't be struggling for things to do should you choose to take a break from the main story. Judgement is a really solid action-adventure game, despite the weaknesses of its newly introduced gameplay elements. While the detective work isn't great, the strength of the game's narrative, characters, and combat easily makes up for this and then some, providing the foundation for a satisfying game and a gripping mystery that you'll have a hard time putting down once it's gotten its claws into you. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please leave us a comment, like, or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We've got tons of awesome videos coming every week, including review impressions, indie game of the week, debate-driven top 5 lists, video essays, and our weekly podcast where we discuss games, gaming culture, and the games industry. We also stream 3 times a week at twitch.tv/wordsaboutgames. But most importantly, have a fantastic day.